All right, welcome to another exciting day of software estimation and measurement. Today we're going to be talking about financial measures for software projects. This is a very important concept that overlays all the concepts. As an administrative note, the final will, for if you're going to be face-to-face option, will be 2 weeks from today. That's May 10th, Thursday, May 10th in the morning. For the face-to-face, for the online section, then a video submission will be in lieu of the face-to-face class period. Okay, so let's talk about financial measures for software projects. So why do we write software?
For a particular task to be done.
To complete a task, okay. And so, so why do companies undertake software projects? Why do they do them? Why do they say we want to do a software project? They want to make money, right? Anybody seen an ad where like they say that the customer is why they do things? That's nice, but that's not real. Companies exist for money. Now within companies there is a spectrum of how much you feel that, and how much they make number two of customer satisfaction be very close. So some companies you feel like they only care about profits. That's the only thing they ever think about. And others you feel like customer service is important to them, but they are concerned about profits. So I just smile when I see certain advertising that no, I don't believe it. I don't believe you're really in business for me. That's nice. That makes, that's a warm feeling, but you're really in business for money. Now, if that's your second place, then it's very high. Well, okay, what about nonprofit organizations then? So nonprofit organizations, by definition, shouldn't be focused on profits, but they have some mission to achieve some goal, to improve literacy, to improve inequality, to reduce poverty, to whatever their mission is, and they have a finite budget. And so with that finite budget, it behooves them to say, okay, we have $100,000 we can spend on this, or we have $1 million to allocate to this. How can we best accomplish our mission with this $100,000, with this $1 million? So it's important for all organizations. So how does money affect software projects? That's really the end goal. Let's just be realistic. If a company wasn't profitable, then it's not a company anymore. Or it won't be. And so the company and you as an employee have a vested interest to have the company be profitable, for you to retain your employment. And so that is the underlying effect. Now that doesn't sound very nice. That doesn't sound very altruistic, but that is the reality under where we're operating. So how does money affect software projects then? How does financial considerations affect software projects? So it affects it in terms of choosing projects, right? I just talked about the nonprofit scenario where they need to choose which projects. Well, that's the best use of their resources, okay? And so there can be there's a little bit of play with this if you increase market share or you have some overall strategy, but a company, except very small ones, don't choose projects based on that's a cool technology. I've always wanted to use this language, or I've always wanted to use VR headsets. Let's make a VR headset project. And so it's no. Will our customers pay money for it? Now, if you're really profitable, something like Google, where you can then tell your employees, 1 day a week, you work on something of your choosing, but which will help our overall mission. So that's nice when you are so profitable that you can afford to do that. And Google's made a lot of money from this 1 day a week assignment that they allow their employees to work on. And in part, it helps morale. It helps recruitment, right? Doesn't that sound cool? We'll tell you what to work on for 4 days a week. You get to work on a project of your choice. I don't know that how well it's defined, but that's my basic understanding of it. And so that's pretty cool. What about product pricing? Anybody taken economics class? You've never taken an economics class?
In school, that's all.
Like a decade ago or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but in terms of, so if you sell your product for $1, you'll sell lots of them. If you offered it $1 million, you'll sell less of them. Mm-hmm. Well, at what price point do you sell your product to be able to maximize profits? The $1, that's not going to work. Well, okay, I take that back. Who's bought a software product for $1? Have you ever bought an app? Dr. Carroll, I'm a student. You know how tight money is? I've been a student. I was a student for 8.5 years. I get it. My wife's and my mentality was, don't spend money. Unless you have to. You got to eat, you got to pay rent, you got to pay tuition. This $1 app, no. So I get it. I've been there. Okay, so one day you'll be able to afford that $1 app that you've always wanted. And so generally, like, this book talks about like $1 million projects, multi-million-dollar projects. Well, I think about the time the book was published, we started to see dollar apps come out or things like that. Or this is tangential, but it's very interesting. I'm not a gamer, but my brother-in-law is, and he was telling me that, oh no, I forgot the name of the game. It's called Micro. Anyway, instead of selling the game, what they did is they sold little things in the game, like power-ups, extended lives, and things like that. And this well-known game that had been out for 10 years changed this model, released it, and within 2 days they made more money than they had in 10 years. Now, I apologize. I wasn't meaning to share that, so I don't have the raw numbers to justify it. But that was the story that I remember it, that instead of like, oh, here's $30 for a game. Oh, okay. It's for 50 cents. We'll give you an extra life. For, $1 will let you buy that extra armor. Oh, $1, that's nothing. 50 cents, that's nothing. Or I was so close. If I just do it this time. And so that's interesting change in way to do things. And now I think we see a lot more things that have a free option and a paid for option. Also in software, you've probably heard of free software. Well, some companies, they're companies, they're trying to make money, have said free is really hard to stay profitable with. And so they'll sell service contracts with their software. And that allows them to pay for things, because while the software is free, If you're a major organization and you're depending on it, then you want to know that there's some service behind it. Free usually means no service. Service costs extra. The free is usually, we're so excited to offer this product, but look, this is my side job. This is what I do from midnight to 2 a.m., but the other time is to pay my bills, to pay for vacations, etc. This is just what I do for fun. But so there has been a rise in the last decade or so of.
Excuse me, sir, is there an extra marker in here? Yes.
That'll cost you.
Is it?
Yes.
Okay.
10% per minute.
Oh,
Okay, so that's a new rise we've seen, service contracts as well, even for free software, because then it allows money to come in. So there is cost estimation and revenue estimation, along with other estimations. And so we need to look at these cost estimations and revenue estimations, and we need everything in terms of dollars to be able to have a unified denominator to be able to look at things. Because the truth is, the company is in business for it to be profitable. We need to monitor progress, and we need to do that in financial terms. Throughout the project. So are we on track? Are we on track financially? At some point, there needs to be a real discussion of, do we abandon this project? Do we stop and consider not working on this project? Well, some things to take into account into that. Are there contractual penalties for not delivering the product? The other one is there branding penalties. I don't know if that's the right term, but in terms of customer satisfaction, they're never going to do business with you again unless they admit, yeah, we were shooting for the moon. That was a bad idea. Unless they're going to admit that. But those are costs that need to be taken into consideration. Need to look at that. So you're going to graduate. How long has it taken you to gain your education as a software engineer, software developer? How long? 4 years? 24 years? My whole life has been for this moment. Okay, so generally we don't say that, but about 6 years, 2 for a master's, 4 for an undergraduate. Okay, so you've spent 6 years training on this. You understand a lot of the ins and outs. You understand a lot of the complexities, the trade-offs. Well, guess what? There are people in large organizations, at least, that exist to help you with the finances. You have the project controllers. You have financial managers at the organizational level. You've probably heard of a CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. Okay. So these people also have gone to school for years to understand money and project costs and things like that. And so you're not alone. You can rely on these people, but the reason we're talking about it is because as a software manager, you need to know enough to understand what is possible, okay, and to be able to interface. And so when they say, "Oh, the ROI," you're like, "Oh yeah," and so that you know what's going on. Now, project managers need to know financial concepts. As they're responsible for budgets and profitability goals. Okay, so if you're managing, they're going to say, okay, how are you doing on your budget? Are you below? Are you above? How are you doing on your profitability goals? And so it's not just this group. Project managers need to understand at least to some degree. So let's talk about some financial concepts. Okay, so we've been talking about this. So how do we select projects? Okay, and what we need to look at is the profitability of that project. And what we need to do is we need to look at all costs. Okay, if we fail to incorporate a cost, that could be dangerous. That could be risky to say, oh yeah, this is going to be a good project. Whereas if we forgot a major component and then that cost is realized, well then maybe our project is no longer profitable. We usually talk about profitability, but if it's an internal project, internal software, then it's a cost savings. Okay, many of our students get hired by a company and the software is for their own company, and so it's to either save from contracting it out or to increase productivity or to reduce error or to reduce risk or to reduce something else. And so then it's a savings, but it's all money. Another financial concept we need to talk about is a rainy day. What is a rainy day? What does that phrase mean? You may have heard of a rainy day fund. Are these phrases that you've come across already? Okay, so do you like it when it's gray and drizzly and rainy? Okay, if you do, go work for Microsoft and live in Seattle, because that's what the weather's like up there. Or Portland. I lived in Portland, Oregon. I was an intern at this company that made stickers on computers. They do some other things, I think. It's called Intel. So I interned there between my sophomore and junior years. And I said, wow, this weather is gorgeous. It's like 85 every day. You hardly needed the air conditioning. It's just beautiful. Like open the windows all summer as compared to Georgia's summers. But the locals would say, yeah, the summers are great. Just wait. But I was there for 3-4 months. We left. I got married while I was there. Like I started, got married, came back. And then I went to my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's wedding a year and a half later in that same area. And it was December because it was a year and a half later. And it was drizzly like the whole time we were there. And I was like, oh, this is what everyone was talking about. There's about 8 months of that in Portland. And there's 4 months of gorgeous weather. So when you're rich and famous, buy a house in Portland for the summer and buy a house in Georgia for the spring, summer, and fall. And you've got it. You're great, okay? Oh, okay, so rainy day. So rainy days affects different people differently. There's some people that have a hard time and get depressed with reduced amount of sunlight. So if that's you, know that and get adequate help and make sure you take advantage of the days that the sun does come out. So, but not everybody hates a rainy day. Anybody gone splashing in puddles? I did that like 2 decades ago. It was fun. Kids love it. And so rain is good. We like the grass to grow. But the phrase in English, rainy day, or like a rainy day fund, is not every day is going to be sunshine and gorgeous. Some days it rains. Imagine if you're on construction, that's going to hurt your schedule. It's like, well, that's a shame. We were hoping to finish today, but we can't. We can't pour concrete or whatever because it's raining. And so it usually has a negative connotation that bad things happen. And so a rainy day fund is your emergency fund for when your car breaks down or whatever you have a medical expense you weren't anticipating. So that's what rainy day means. Does that help? Okay, let's talk about another term. So I just offhandedly mentioned return ROI. That's short for return on investment. Okay, but if you're in the field, then they'll just say ROI. And so hopefully you don't do this. You catch yourself explaining acronyms depending on your audience. Now, if you're in a financial audience, ROI, there's no point in saying return on investment. You say ROI. But so return on investment is a measure, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, but let me just introduce it here. The measure of benefits derived over time from an investment. Okay, with that simple definition, can you think of any where ROI would come into play in general? So just in general life, people think of like stocks or real estate. They say, well, if I buy this real estate, what's going to be my return on investment? At least you should ask that, okay? Because if you're not asking that, you're not asking the right questions. What about school? What about a degree? Does that fit into this?
Okay. By knowledge,
So
not in terms of money.
could you look at your master's degree as an investment?
Yes.
I look at it that way.
Yeah.
In terms of, so why'd you get a master's? Why are you working on a master's? Sorry. Why are you almost done getting a master's? Why?
Probably money also is a factor. We'll be earning more if we complete masters.
Okay.
Than a bachelor's degree, master's degree counts more.
So you're expecting a higher paying job based on the fact that you have a master's. Okay. It's a little late, but did anybody ask you, well, what if you started a job after a bachelor's? You would be working for 2 years and you'd have 2 years of experience. Are you thinking you'll still be ahead if you start with the master's and get a job versus have a bachelor's for 2 years?
Yeah.
So that's the questions that return on investment ask in terms of, okay, well, you could have been earning money instead of spending money this last 2 years. Now, before you're like, oh man, I didn't think of it that way. Maybe I should have. There's more reasons than just money
Yeah.
to get a master's. Some people like titles. I don't think that's a good reason. But if you like lots of initials after your name, then a degree's for you. And the university is happy to take your money. Another reason is your type of job changes. This is not an undergraduate class. There's a reason for that. Undergraduates will not be applying these concepts, at least not immediately. They need to have a lot more experience before they do. So your type of job, we want to hire somebody for this, that we're going to have to get somebody with a master's. And so to me, the job type, the work function changes. Instead of entry-level software to master's level software, it's more interesting, more challenging, more demanding. And that is appealing, even if the pay was similar. So, any other reasons? Okay, so maybe tonight calculate your return on investment on your master's degree. And when you do, consider to donate to the Computer Science Fund, for scholarships and other things, because you'll be happy when you do that. But there are ways to quantify this. And of course, with return on investment, bigger is better. Higher is better. There's another term I want to talk about, and that's payback period. Okay? So this is how long it takes for an investment. Whoa, where'd we go? It takes for an investment to repay its cost. And of course here, shorter is better. So how would we calculate that for your master's degree? You could say, okay, well, let's just use a round number, $10,000. Cost $10,000 to get that piece of paper, that credential. It's an expensive piece of paper. How long does it take to actually pay for itself? Okay, well, if you make $10,000 more that first year, a really crude analysis would be, well, okay, it takes 1 year. Depending on how you look at things, you could say, well, I could have been making $60,000 for the last 2 years. But there is also, your expenses would have gone up if your income went up. So you're eating, hopefully, if not, we can talk about solutions to that. You're living, like life went on in the last 2 years, right? It wasn't just like paused. You didn't take the trip to France that you were hoping to, or wherever, but life did go on. So some of these things are a little hard to quantify in terms of personal things, but that's what payback period means. Okay, let's talk about overhead costs. Okay, so overhead is a contracted word that you can't just understand over and head in English. But it's just, what it is your organizational level, at least the way we're going to talk about, organizational level cost of doing business. Okay, and it's spread over all projects. Okay, we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but let me say now that sometimes it's referred to as an internal tax, right? There's taxes placed on the government of which you live to provide certain things that are applicable to everybody. They don't service just you. And these are incurred whether or not your project fails or whether it's completely profitable. These are incurred whether or not you even write any code. Okay, so these are just the cost of doing business. So there's risk management, and what this is identifying, assessing, planning, monitoring, and mitigating risks. We've been talking about risks like last time with outsourcing and throughout, and so this is, let's put some financial measures on risks now and talk about managing them and mitigating them. Capital expenses is the last term for now, and then we'll get into other stuff. Capital expenses. Okay, a capital expense is the cost of an asset that has benefit beyond the current year. Okay, at least that's how we're going to define it. If you fill out your federal taxes, they were due last Thursday. They might have their own definition. This is the definition we're going to talk about. Okay, so with that as a background, let's talk about costs and benefits. Okay, so there exist more projects in the world, more interesting things to do than there is money to do them. Okay, and so hopefully you have also internalized this concept in terms of time management, in terms of choosing what you want to do with your time shows your priorities. Okay, and so when we're looking at which project, we should look at what is the return on investment, what is the payback period, and there's more than one way to calculate these. As a side, just to give you a heads up, I lived in Tennessee for 6 years. I bought a house, I got a mortgage, I didn't pay for it outright, and I can't remember if it was 9 months later or like 18 months later, I refinanced. And so I looked at, well, how much is this going to cost me and how long is it going to take? Now that's an extreme example. It ended up costing me just $42, and I refinanced, and I've been putting that extra money away, and I've saved $6,000 from doing that. So that was awesome return on investment. I wish I could multiply that multifold. But I had options. When you have a mortgage, you can take a credit or give a credit in terms of your interest rate. And so I said, well, I will have a higher interest rate, but you cover the closing costs for the loan. So typically you have three options. You can take a point or give a point, or just have the base interest rate. So you should look at this when you get a mortgage, because you say, well, if I raise my interest rate, that's bad over the life of the loan, but it's good at the beginning. And you have to take into account that most people move on average every 7 years. So you can't just say, oh, this is really good, I'll pay money to have a lower interest rate, because especially when you start out, you're likely to sell and move. But this comes into these terms in terms of how long will it take if I choose this option for it to be better than the other option. And so I said, well, I'll have a higher interest rate, but I'll have a lower cost. What does that look like over the years? If I had a lower interest rate but higher upfront cost, how long would that take? And so the break-even point was ridiculous. So, okay. So costs and benefits. Let's talk about costs first. I've already mentioned this once, but let me stress it again. We need to take into consider all costs. So what's a cost of a software project? What do you think cost? Where are we going to have to spend money to get the project done and shipped? Salaries. That's the number one. Okay, good job. That is typically the largest expense of a software project is salaries. Okay, they're the ones we also get most excited about. What other expenses would there be? Tools. Okay, and I like to throw in like technology, any technology you're gonna purchase or utilize along those. Okay, what else? How are you gonna develop the code? We need some computers to do it on. That's gonna cost something. Software, and so maybe that's with tools, depending on how you define tools. What software? What other costs are there? Marketing. Okay. Marketing is usually we usually consider like marketing in terms of overhead, unless you're going to do a specific marketing campaign for that. But a lot of the marketing costs, like the marketing department doesn't come and go per project. They're in the company, whether you add a new project or not. Now, if you had some special, they might hire somebody for that project to market that project or sales, but you hit on overhead. Training. So a training department, or the time to like get people up to speed. And we talked about that with outsourcing. Do we train people or do we train other people? And those are very different. So you could put training as an overhead. Maybe they have a training department. You could put it as, well, it's going to affect salaries because we're going to have a slower effective time. There's different ways to do it, but I'm glad you're thinking of them. If travel, that adds up quickly. And so there's lots of rules about companies and travel. And there's others, okay, that we could keep going, but the list is not exhaustive here. And so typically what is done is we estimate costs monthly. And the reason we do that is because we typically monitor them monthly. And so then if we say, hey, in month 13, we expected to be here, well, once you get to month 13, then you can look and see where you are. Okay, so let's talk about salaries for a minute. Okay, we've already talked about staff estimations in previous lectures. Okay, and so what we need to do is we need to go from staff hours to money. Okay, how are we going to do that? Should we be conservative and just figure out what's the highest paid software developer, the highest paid salary? Say what?
Average salary.
An average? Average of what?
Salary.
Okay.
Everyone.
So you're we don't want to offend anybody since this is a video. Your bachelor's and your senior developer are going to have different salaries. Okay, your
In the
master's
family
level and your bachelor's. And so, yes, you don't want to just pick one, because if you said, well, okay, what's it cost to get a new developer, and we need 1,000 staff hours? Oh no, that's not going to work. And if you plan on, okay, well, what's our most expensive developer? 1,000 staff hours. Well, you don't have, or 1,000,000 staff hours. You're not going to have him or her doing that job the whole time. And so what you typically do is apply a blended rate to accomplish that. And so when we're planning the project, when we're estimating, we're going to assume some blended rate. But so we need to monitor that over time. In the blended rate, would we incorporate the janitor's costs? To average it out? You said an average of what? So generally we consider janitors to be in overhead, right? We're going to need the building cleaned up, no matter what. No matter if we, that's just kind of a standard. It applies to all projects. Okay, let's talk about overhead. So we talked a little bit marketing department. Let's put human resources in there. You're going to have legal costs, and so you just average those out over all projects. You got to be careful here talking about this too, but executives cost money. Janitors cost money. To run a building, it costs money. So, for example, have you ever thought of how much it costs to heat and cool this building? That's a lot. It's a lot. That's why I don't like, it makes me uncomfortable when people push the handicap button when they don't need to. Because in a Georgia summer, all that cold air just went out the door, and I just see like dollar bills flying out. That's what I see in my mind. It's like, let's keep the doors closed. Let's keep the cold air in. It costs money to do that. Okay, or in the winter to let the hot air out. And so what this means is they are dollars. So how do we calculate the dollars for our project? Well, there's two ways to do that. One is we could do like the percentage based on the salaries. Okay, well, we just need some way to say, well, what's your share for the project? Because you need to take into account overhead costs. Now, your organization will probably say this is what your overhead contribution is going to be. And so one way to just say is, okay, well, how much are you going to have in salaries? Well, if you have more salaries, you have more HR things going on. You have more salaries, you use the restrooms more. I don't know. If you have more salaries, you need more building space in general. Another way to do it is to look at your project's the percentage of the overhead is based on the project's projected profitability, and I guess you could change it over time. If your profitability changed, you could change the project's profitability compared to the corporate revenue. So how profitable is the company? Well, you're producing 50% of the revenue for the company. We're going to have you pay for half the cost. And so that's good and bad. It's your cash cow. I was looking at Apple's profitability, their profits, and it changed dramatically in 1 year. And it was the year that they released iTunes for Windows. You're like, oh, you mean that hasn't been going on since the beginning of time? No, there was a time that you had to have an Apple computer to have iTunes or an iPod or whatnot. And the year that they released iTunes for Windows, this was like 15 years ago. So you're like, oh, that's why I didn't know, you know. But their profits went way up. And so their iTunes division, which is not really that complex. In fact, Apple, if you're listening, could you please put in the feature to be able to speed up or slow down the music? I would really like that. I have to use another product to do that, and it bothers me. But that product doesn't cost a lot of money compared to the revenue that they get, you know, for it. And so I don't know how Apple does it. If they say, look, you're producing, you know, 50% of the company's profits, so you can pay for 50% of our overhead. Or if they say, yeah, we spend $1 million a year on development for iTunes, so that's your, for salaries, then that's your overhead. I don't know, and maybe they change it over time. But do not forget to include overhead costs in project planning. Okay. So let's talk about risk costs. Okay. So you can, but it's unwise, kind of take the ostrich with its head in the sand approach to just ignore them and just say, well, I don't know what to do. I hope they don't ever happen. So the Quality Assurance Institute lists among their top 10 challenges for software projects a lack of risk management. Okay, so that's one of the top 10 challenges. So let's talk about that. First is, let's talk about quantifying risk. Okay, and so now this is just an introduction. You can read multiple books about risk management and specialize, but this can get you started and understand ways to approach it. So we talked about risk management already, and what we talked about is it's these activities here: identifying, assessing, planning, monitoring, and mitigating risks. Okay. And so there's risks in different categories. Some of them are business risks. Okay, so what would that be? A change in market conditions. So you've probably heard the economy is not always rosy. Sometimes the economy has a rainy day. And so if you said, you know, things are selling well and you planned on selling them well, but then the economy goes down, people are tighter, corporations and individuals are tighter with their money, then that very well could happen. Or you could say, oh, this is great, we are making all this money from all these people, but what you didn't see coming was somebody else said, hey, this is a great market, and there's a competitor that entered the field which you did not anticipate. So if things are really, really good, maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe you should take into consideration that if it's really profitable, somebody else will start up a company to tap into those resources. Or one of your employees will quit and do a startup to be able to do those. You can put that in contracts to minimize that. And whether, but yeah. So there are contract risks, okay? There are cost risks, there are schedule risks, we've talked about schedules before. There are technical risks. So a technical risk would be, for example, that it takes longer than expected to work with the new technology. So we put that in the technical arena. There's customer satisfaction risks. This is customer satisfaction, maybe in the development. They said, oh, we forgot to tell you about this 25% of requirements. You should plan on that. So Barry Boehm is a well-known researcher in this area, and he came up with the top 10 list of software risks. And this is published in IEEE Computer, May of 1988. So 20 years ago, next month. in an article, I believe. And so his top 10 software risks are personnel, and we'll talk about each of these in turn. Personnel shortfalls, okay. Unrealistic. So now let's talk about each of these in turn. So personnel shortfalls. So techniques to address this is staff with your top talent. Make sure you're doing a good job with job matching, team building, morale building, cross training, so that you have people that are ready. You're pre-scheduling, keep people for different things. So some of these things along those lines of Google in terms of job morale and things like that. You offer your employees 1 day a week to something that's more fulfilling to them. Hopefully you'll retain more of them. They also give free food, free laundry service, free as another way to build morale. So that does exist. And we're seeing more and more now. I just, at that, the student appreciation event, some people from TSIS came and they were showing me they had just redesigned one of the floors in their building for their developers, and it was built in a way that was more inviting, that was exciting, that was modern. And so that's another way companies are trying to increase morale. The second one is unrealistic schedules and budgets. I don't know if you've already heard that can sometimes be a real thing. There's some ways to deal with this. We could have a detailed multi-source cost and schedule estimation. We could do a mission analysis, an ops concept formulation. We could do user surveys. We could have prototyping. We could be able to get those out. So there's another one of the top 10 is developing the wrong software functions. Okay, you've spent a lot of money on it, but it's not the right one. And so some ways to mitigate that is early user manuals, to do a task analysis, to do prototyping. Hey, okay, this doesn't work yet, but it's just the front screen. Is this what you're thinking? If they say, yeah, this is perfect, or they say, no, this is all wrong. Well, okay, we've minimized how much work we did by being able to do that, going through scenarios and things like that. Developing the wrong user interfaces. Sorry, I'm blending these. So 5 is an interesting one, and it is gold plating. What does gold plating mean? Are there any buildings that you can think of that have gold plating on them? Or you might have heard of some celebrity. I've heard of a car once being gold plated. So gold plating refers to adding features to the software that only are marginally useful. Okay, and sometimes they're very expensive, but like gold plating a car or a building, it doesn't really help that much. It's just all right, and so it's not useful, but it costs money. So some ways to mitigate this are requirement scrubbing and prototyping and doing a cost-benefit analysis to be able to talk about these different things. Number 6 is continuing stream of requirement changes. It's like a software manager's nightmare. So you could have a high change threshold. Okay, we're not going to change things unless it's really important. You could do incremental development. You could defer changes to later increments. The 7th one is shortfalls in externally furnished components. Okay, and so you can do some benchmarking to understand that better. You can have inspections, you can do reference checking, you can do a compatibility analysis to be able to mitigate those risks. How much time do we have? Okay, so 8 is shortfalls in externally performed tasks. Okay, and we talked about this with outsourcing and things like that. We could have real-time performance shortfalls. There are ways we can mitigate that. And then for the last one is straining computer science capabilities. So we could do a technical analysis, we could do a cost-benefit analysis, we could do prototyping, we could do reference checking to be able to address those. So that's Barry Boehm's top 10 list of software risks, and different ways to do that. Okay, so talking about risk, let me tell you a story. I like stories, right? So the Carroll family, for the last 10 years, except this last year and another abnormal year, holds a pie night. Pie night is this awesome event where you bring a pie, you set it down on the table, and then you have a slice of your favorite 40 pies. Okay? And we host it before Thanksgiving because in America, on Thanksgiving, you eat too much. That's the rule. That's how it works. Okay? But this is the night before, so you haven't eaten too much yet. Okay? So we get them before that. And we just open up our house. It's an open house atmosphere. And so we were trying to estimate one year how many people were going to show up. And so what we did is, as we extended invitations, we assigned a probability based on, they sounded like there's a 1 in 10 chance. They sound like there's about a 40% chance, or, they're going to be here even if they have their leg amputated, kind of a probability. And then we multiplied that by how many people in their party. And what was amazing is we're geeks, my wife and I, and we counted how many guests came through the front door, and it was really close to the number we estimated based on the probability we assigned of them coming times how many people in their party. And we were really close to our estimate. We were within like 4 or 5. I think we were about like in the 80s or 90s or something like that of guests. It's a big fun event. And I thought, wow, that was really amazing. And so you can do the same sort of approach with risks. And so what you should do is you should assign a probability with each risk, okay? And you should assign a cost with that risk. And then what do? You multiply them, and that gives you your expected value or cost, if you're familiar with. And then you can assign risk. So one way to do this is assign risk levels. And so your company might say, we have low, medium, and high risks. And so if you identified this as a medium risk, then we're gonna assume then that that's a 20% charge. So if you have a budget of $500,000, you take your $500,000 times your 20% risk rating, and then that's $100,000 that you can say, well, this could easily go up $100,000. You need to take that into account before you start the project to do it. Another way to do it would be to quantify each risk in terms of its estimated cost of occurrence, the probability, and the estimated cost of mitigation. And so then you could say, okay, well, this is along the lines of what we did with Pie Night, is you could say, okay, well, there's a 10% chance of this happening, or there's a 25% chance that they're going to increase requirements. They rarely reduce requirements. Increase requirements. We're going to put that at about a 25% probability, and it's going to cost this much extra money. Then what you can do is you can say, okay, what are we going to do to mitigate those risks? You've identified that there's a real probability of those risks happening. So what can we do to mitigate them? And some of them you put in the contract. If you fail to deliver this, you will pay X dollars. Okay. So that financial risk that you had, you've now pushed on to your supplier or somebody else. You could have cross-trained people. There's different options you could do, which cost money, but then they mitigate your risks down further on. We've talked about that risk management is not just a planning activity, okay? You need to continue to monitor it throughout the lifespan. And what will happen is some of the risks will disappear over time. The risk that a supplier won't deliver on time, that risk goes away after the supplier delivers on time. And so then they can fall off. Okay, let's talk about different expenses, because this is important to keep into track as we're talking about money. So there's capital, and then there's just expenses. Okay, so the accounting department does not treat all costs the same. And these concepts will also help on like your personal taxes as well. So as I mentioned before, capital dollars are multi-year investments. That's like by definition. So some examples would be equipment, buildings, things like that. Whereas expenses, so what if those are capital expenses, what's just a normal expense? So capital is a multi-year expenditure, something that's going to have benefit for multiple years. So what's just a typical expense then? It would be salaries, right? If you pay for a salary, that's because you got the benefit in that year. You can't pay, it doesn't work that I paid your salary this year, you're going to work for next year for free. That doesn't work, okay? Hopefully you don't work for a company that thinks that way. We've talked about people like clean restrooms and spaces. Copier paper, okay? Now, not the copier. That's going to be a capital expense because we hope the copier is going to last a lot more than a year. But the paper, the utility bill, that was something that was realized in that time frame. Okay, so now you're saying, well, that's great. So, but why are we talking about these? Well, one part is that we can choose between the two, and usually there's a capital budget and then there's just a regular expense budget. And so your company might say, okay, we're going to put this much into capital funds. And so you can choose which one it goes to. How can you do that? It's not just how you categorize it, but you could choose to lease instead of purchase. Okay? There's a trade-off between short-term and long-term. Maybe you're not sure if this is the car you want to buy. You're going to lease it for 1 year. Okay? Leasing's a lot more expensive, but then you're like, oh yeah, this is it. You know. And so now cars, I don't know that it ever makes sense to lease, in my unhumble opinion. But with a technology or something, it's like, look, there's few reviews on it. We think it's going to be amazing. We'll lease it for 1 year, and then we'll decide to purchase it or not. That can make a lot of sense. Or management has said, look, shareholders are upset. No capital expenses this year, or vice versa. You may choose to purchase something that's lower quality or cheaper that year, and it's going to be consumed, versus something that you really want that is going to be more expensive. Okay, so you do have some options between choosing between the two. Has anybody worked anywhere where they knew what the rotation schedule for like the computers were? Like replacement policy? Okay, so like at a university, they typically, I think the university as a whole, is every 5 years they say they'll replace a computer. Okay, in the computer science, in the School of Computer Science, it's every 3 years. But we don't want to mention that too loudly because I mean, we're computer science. We need more up-to-date equipment. And so there's some terms that come into this. So there's the service life. It's the length of time the asset will be used. Okay, so computer, 3 years. Okay, copier, what do you think? A $5,000 copier, I don't know, 5 years? 10 years? I'm not in that world. There's another concept called depreciation. Depreciation. So this is the amount that a tangible asset is used up in a year. Okay, so typically we talk about it in a given year. And so a copier, it's 1 year old. Okay, well, it was $5,000. We expect it to last 5 years. So we say it's $1,000 is how much it's depreciated. Another way to look at depreciation is what could you sell it for, but those are different. So this isn't what is it's worth, it's you're depreciating the cost of it. Another term we use is amortizing. We're amortizing the cost of it over time. And so if you have some large technology equipment that's $50,000 and you say, look, it's only going to last 5 years, well then what you do is you depreciate it and say $10,000 in the first year, $10,000 the second year, third, fourth, fifth year. There's one final concept that salvage value, okay? And so this is the value, if any, at the end of the service life. Okay, is that copier worth anything after 5 years? You could probably sell it to some organization that's looking for something that they're willing to take a risk or whatnot and get something out of it. That $50,000 computer equipment, it's worth something, maybe only $5,000. So some companies look at that and they change their depreciation and say, well, look, we're going to get it has a value, we're going to sell it after 5 years. Other companies say, look, how are we going to know what it's going to be worth in 5 years, if anything? Let's just take the full depreciation rate, and if we get something for it, great, that's income. Okay? Okay, so that's costs. Let's talk about benefits. Okay, so if we're talking about an external project, then what we're talking about is sales revenue. Okay? And so sales revenue, you could say, okay, we are producing this product. We're going to sell it for $50,000 per license. We expect to sell 2 the first year, 5 the second year, and 10 the third year is how many licenses we expect to sell. And so then you could look at that sales revenue and project that. Now you should work with the marketing department to come up with realistic estimations for sales. So and you should enumerate the assumptions that you come up with. Now what if it's internal? So if it's an internal project, then it's savings. And so maybe it's not dollars, but it's increased productivity. Well, we typically still quantify that financially in terms of dollars that we're going to save, even though it's not, if you're going to save an employee an hour a day, it's not that they're not going to get paid for that hour, it's that hour of their salary can then go to other things or other productivity. And you should be realistic about this in terms of there's probably a learning curve. So we're not going to immediately realize the full benefit of some savings. It's going to take some time to ramp up to that. With our remaining minutes, let's talk about doing some calculations. So let's talk about return on investment. That's ROI, remember. So ROI is calculated as the net benefits divided by our investment. Okay? And so what are net benefits? Net benefits are the benefits minus the costs. Okay, so let's put this into practice. So we have an example here. Let's assume that we have a product, and what it's going to be is $50,000 per year, or a savings of $50,000, depending. So we expect that we're going to get $50,000 a year for having it. Well, that's great, but it comes with a cost, and so that's the benefit. The cost then is it's going to be $100,000 plus $10,000 per year. Okay, so you have this large upfront cost. So should we do it? Anybody got $100,000? They want to buy this thing or invest in this thing? Okay, so well, let's look at this. So year one. Okay, so net benefits divided by investment. Okay, well, the investment's the easy part. That's the $100,000, right? What is the net benefit? It's what? So sorry, that we're thinking subsequent years. Years 2 plus. Okay? So not the first year. That 10,000 is already wrapped into the 100,000. Okay? So then the net benefit is we have the benefits, which is $50,000 minus the $100,000. And so that's negative 50 over 100. We're at negative 50%. This seems like a bad investment. Okay, well, let's look at year two. What's year two going to be? So our net benefits, we get 2 years of that. Okay, this is at the end of year two. And then we have $100,000, but then we also have this $10,000 one. And then our investment here, we need to up it by another, we're $110,000 into it. So now what is that going to be? Gonna be -9. Okay, so we're still losing money, and it's a lot of money, right? You forked out $100,000. Now you're $110,000, but we've been able to pull in or save $100,000, and you can see where this is going. So year three now, we've gotten 3 years, so we've gotten $150,000, but now we've had to spend $120,000 on it. So we actually turn, and so it's 25% profitable, and you can see the pattern that is emerging here. Year four, we got $200,000 out of it, and year four was great because we only had to put in $10,000. We got $50,000 out of it, and so now we're at 54%. You're smart. You see the pattern. And so in year five, we're at 79%. That's not a 9. And then year six, we're at 100%. Okay? And we are at 100% of this lecture. Okay, but that's the return on investment. You can calculate and say, okay, how long is it going to take? I mean, that's a big cost, $100,000, but there's a big benefit. So should we do it? So what if this was a benefit of $20,000 a year? Should we do it? What would be the return on investment? It depends on how long. Probably we're better putting our money somewhere else and doing something else. All right. This is financial measures for software projects with Dr. Carroll. Thank you.